Thanks for coming this afternoon. I'll just make a few remarks and then hand it over to our speaker. We are talking about downtown specific plan. Downtown term is a new term, and I want to talk a little bit about the area that it covers. And we discussed yesterday, when we talk about downtown, particularly the specific plan area, we're talking about two streets. We're talking about Mission Street, and we're talking about Fair Oaks. Now, as you've heard Stefanos describe some of the history, later today for your Jennifer, who's our local historian, the history of this area grew around Mission Street, Mission Station, around the Santa Fe Station in roughly around 1880s. And then the streetcars, when they were added on to Fair Oaks, Fair Oaks came to life. Eventually, when the streetcars were removed, Fair Oaks transitioned into an auto lane because we replaced our streetcars with automobiles as a mode of transportation. So the users reflected the change in the mobility aspects along the corridor. The mission, however, continued to remain a walkable environment. So there are two different environments, two different centers that we're talking about, and we are at a crucial point in the history of the evolution because there are choices before us today. One of the choices is, does Fair Oaks becomes a drive-through experience? Go from one place to another, and it's just a pass-through. Or do we signal and send out an invitation that this is a place where we would love for you to come, we would love for you to stay, live, work, shop. So there are some trade-offs associated with this. We heard a presentation yesterday. The noon speaker talked about how South Pasadena has but 1% of retail within our competitive area. And that's roughly about 866,000 square feet of retail. But then he also went on to say the retail that you have in the competing environments are the mid boxes or the big boxes or the malls or shopping center environment. And as we look at some of the national news, just CNN was reporting this past weekend that a majority of a large number of these big boxes are either retrenching or frankly going away, and they're expecting a number of these stores to re-examine their business model. So as we look at how we position South Pasadena, we have a unique opportunity. Yes, we have leakage in our retail because we're just 1% of the competitive market, but we can also draw from the experiential retail, the retail that Amitabh was talking about, that Stefanos is about talking about, which brings people from outside the community to enjoy the 1% retail and be infused into the sales tax economy of this place. We talked about last night some ideas on what Fair Oaks and Mission Street, the public realm, the streets, the open spaces could be. We'll continue the discussion this evening. I want to hand it over to our speaker. I want to introduce this because we work together on a number of projects, but this is a unique opportunity where you can really say that Stefanos is a local person. He bought his first home in South Pasadena. He's architect of the Mission Building Project and numerous projects in this area. He's intimately familiar with South Pasadena at the local level. At the regional level, he and his firm have designed numerous successful downtown projects. And at the national level, and also international level, we worked on a project together at the international level. But at the national level, something he's co-founded a movement, a national movement to revitalize downtown areas. He's one of the most sought-after speakers nationally on the topic of downtown. It's a great pleasure to invite my friend to chat with you this afternoon.
I can say with a smile that everything I know about architecture and urbanism I've learned in South Pasadena. And that is really important because I came to the United States as a foreign student and had to stay in the United States and ask for political asylum because my family was involved in a serious issue in Greece where I grew up against the dictatorship of the colonels at the time. So I had to stay here, despite exactly knowing why I had to stay here. I was told to stay here and did, and ended up really stranded in a way in South Pasadena with the task of trying to understand what American architecture was about if I had to stay here and live the rest of my life. So it was a very propitious place to land in. If you can think there's a whole continent available to immigrants, and that I ended up here. So it was a remarkable thing, and it's quite true that there are many truly extraordinary aspects of this town that are worth not only living in, but also thinking about. Today I want to talk to you about the issue of appropriate architectural form appropriate to place, which is a rare subject because most architects these days are dedicated to dystopia, to making buildings as they happen to come to their heads and pushing them around the world without any thought about placemaking. And I want to start by showing you this image. I tried very hard to find one of South Pasadena. If anybody has access to one, please send it to me. This one is a photograph that is hanging outside the hearing room at the Yale building in Pasadena. And it's an aerial of the city in 1932, which is a very magical moment, because you can see in the foreground a very compact, dense, mixed-use city center. You can see beyond verdant suburbs, and beyond that, you can see access to nature. Some of you who grew up here probably remember this version of this part of the San Gabriel Valley as you were growing up. What is most extraordinary about this is that this image is about 2/3 of Southern California as we know it, of the urbanized portion of Southern California in 1932, were actually in agriculture. And what is even more extraordinary, and this is really the third Los Angeles 900 and 940, is the Los Angeles that grew through the power of the red car system and allied systems of street transit. And as you can see, just by this very simple alignment of railroad right-of-ways of transit right-of-ways to developed areas, most all neighborhoods and most all districts of the 88 cities in Southern California were walkable and accessible to transit, largely accessible to transit. So this was really an amazing form of an American city at the pinnacle of traditional urbans of this country, where you would have a region such as this organized around transit with some support from cars and dedicated to both urbanity and to rurality, anyway, to agriculture, as you see in this document. What happened, of course, is this image is 1 year younger than I am, so we're talking about live, as we're living kinds of phenomena. This is the image that captured the imagination of our country after the Second World War. This is an idea that came to predominate in urban development, that people had to live to live in a place that was more healthful, that they had to live in certain kinds of buildings that gave them maximum privacy, that nature mattered, independence mattered, and the avoidance of urban issues and urban problems of all kinds mattered. And of course, nobody figured out the unintended consequences of this kind of movement, because with suburbanization came enormous new investment in infrastructure and absolute dominance of cars and of suburbs and a rush to suburbs away from what were cities, with disastrous results for our country and for its economy. That was half of the story of the history of the last 2 generations. The other half of the story is that schools of architecture and architects and other technical institutions of all kinds were generally swayed by ideas that came from abroad that had to do little with reality. They were really idealized constructs, in this case, the urbanist ideas of the Congress of International Modern Architecture, that was a European, pan-European movement, minor American participation. And that basically after the war, precipitated an extraordinary process of destroying the center cities of America, of the United States, and trying to replace them with an architecture and urbanism of a kind that was seen as being future-oriented, but in fact was very seriously in conflict with the realities of what was in place and with American lives and American interests and American economies the way they were being exercised at the time. The results of this movement were just excruciatingly painful and amazingly economically harmful. One of the first things that happened in this process was the process of urban renewal. Was the center cities in the United States, 120 of them approximately, were declared blighted, and dozens of city blocks of buildings were removed in each one of them. And then the system of the country, of movement in the country, which was largely multimodal, but centered on streetcars, was totally erased. In probably between about 1960 and 1970, there was not a single one of the systems left in the United States. It is really, and it was an amazing thing. Come to think about it, we have about approximately 450 miles of transit back after 30 years of trying, as opposed to the 2,500 we had at the pinnacle of this movement. And it has cost us, a few $100 billion to get here. And you can only imagine, if you multiply that by 5, we probably call this a $1 trillion mistake, which is, at the national level, would be catastrophic. At the regional, state level, is just out of this world, incomprehensible. That something like this could, in fact, happen. And of course, there was another process that you were not spared in South Pasadena, but South Pasadena was too small to be part of this kind of urban renewal. This is the Pasadena Athletic Club, one of the great buildings in the corner of Los Robles and Green, Marshall Campbell and Mayer, being demolished to be replaced by the mall, which was itself being demolished twice since then. Again, in order to appreciate how foolish we have been, the first mall cost about a couple $100 million. The second mall cost about $300 million. So we spent $500 million, and we haven't got it right yet in the mall, because there's another 100 or so, or 200 about to be spent there. So this is not the way to do urban development. That's not the way to think about the present and the future. It is terribly important to do the kinds of things we're doing here, trying to understand where the long-term values lie and how to follow up on not the latest fashion, but the most stable and the most consequential and the most important aspects of decision-making you can imagine. What, of course, followed in the course of demolition, and this is all Pasadena, was that here we lost 6 city blocks of historic buildings in the late 1960s, and we got a freestanding building, which is about also now to be torn down in the next 10 years, to be replaced by streets and blocks of buildings. So we live in this kind of completely bizarre circular world in which we're swayed, we do things, and then over time we feel sorry about our decisions of our predecessors, and we get back to where we used to be. And of course, worse than individual buildings built by commercial concerns and perhaps even by cities, is really this very, very poor quality residential construction going on by businesses operating not by criteria of quality, but by criteria of volume. So, and I would say this is a very important characteristic for you to think about as we are going forward, judging projects in your community, or choosing developers, or communing with developers. The development business is very split. It is very split between people who have local sources of finance, or their own source of finance, and are focused on quality and trying to do the right thing in the right place, and those who have Wall Street money with guns to their head, and they have to move fast and in volume, and want to build the largest possible buildings in the fastest possible way, in the cheapest possible way, in order to be able to meet their obligations. So it is fine, people can operate the way they want to operate in the world, but you have to be aware of what you may want and be able to choose within those parameters. And of course, I don't have to tell you that at the end of this discussion between the architecture and urbanism before the Second World War and the architecture of urbanism after the Second World War, we've gone through at least a couple of generations of conflict. You here are excellent representatives of this kind of conflict. It has to do with fighting the 710 freeway. It has to do with fighting buildings that are to the right, like the one to the right, to save buildings like the one to the left. Basically, there's this ongoing friction between a contemporary system of regulation that enables buildings and places of a certain kind to happen in conflict with the values of the buildings and the environments that are received historically and the people that live in them and enjoy them and think of them as being theirs, who see themselves as being the parties that defend them. So we've gone through this friction, and this friction is still going on in many ways. What is going on with the Charrette is probably a way of finally resolving, at least in South Pasadena, those kinds of questions and putting them to bed. That's the way I understand the context, and that's why I started with these images, because I want you to be clear to understand that if you don't feel for and fully appreciate the past and how we got to be here, you and us will never be able to get to a future worth living in. And so here we are in the Fort Los Angeles, at the end of the Fort Los Angeles in 1990, pre the instigation of the new train system and so on. This sort of is the maximum sprawl-based, auto-based Los Angeles. So what happened after the war? We destroyed center cities, we destroy the train systems, we build freeways, and then because we build freeways, we can actually get people to work in the interstices of all the other places that have been built before. Every last square foot, every last square inch of the space between freeways is getting, and among freeways, is actually getting developed. And so we end up with a situation like this, with nature at the edges, squeezed out, with a few open places in the middle, and just wall-to-wall buildings, about 60 miles by 60 miles, 3,600 miles, one of the largest continuous urbanization area in the world, with many other areas to follow. So, having said that, what is it that we're trying to do, and what is it that we're trying to do? What is it we're not trying to do? Let's start with the negative. What is it we're not trying to do? We're trying to get away from Crayola zoning. What is Crayola zoning? Crayola zoning is looking at the city or a piece of land and taking out a color pencil and say, or a pen and saying, well, okay, this is R1, the single family house. It's like drawing on a map without any understanding of any issue other than single use. And this is a classic example. PDX, RN, RL, RNPD, all those kinds of things. But where's the scale here that tells us how large this area is? Where's the scale that tells us what is the intention of the size of blocks, or the kinds of streets, or how interconnected the streets are, or how is the overall infrastructure laid out, or how do activities overlap one with the other? So the exclusivity of activities is one issue that has really destroyed traditional American urbanism and architecture, and I think under a project like the one we're undertaking here, we're trying to make the overlap of use and the maximum mixed use of buildings legal again. The other one is that the FAR mechanism is truly destructive and very unpredictable. I want to talk to you about what FAR means. FAR is flow area ratio. You heard me say it last night. If the FAR is 1, what you get is you get a building to build that is as big as the area of the site you're on. So you have a 40,000, you have an acre, 43,000 plus square feet. You can get 43,000 square feet of building. But the problem is that this particular mechanism is an entitlement mechanism. It actually is telling you what is it you can build. It doesn't tell you how to build it. In other words, you can build a one-story building like this that goes the entire lot without any setbacks. You can go 50% on a two-story building, 50% coverage, or you can do 4 stories with 25% coverage. And the problem with that is that if there is no form definition in a code about how to actually locate those buildings and how to make sure that buildings of certain kinds begin to go next to each other and how buildings actually begin to respect each other if you have a setting of existing buildings and new buildings are coming in, what happens in the end is you get complete chaos and complete confusion because the code simply entitles. It entitles abstractly, and this abstraction has absolutely nothing to do with the built environment in which it's being inserted. And it turns out, therefore, I mean, amazingly, that these two buildings have the same FAR. if you can believe that, right? Because one of them is on a very large site, and the other is on a very small site. One is multi-story, and the other is not. And that mechanism is really corrupt, in the technical sense, corrupt. It is not consistently rendering an expected result, which I think in our case would be a city where new buildings are actually compatible with existing buildings. What happened, of course, in the last in the last generation, 30 years ago, is the new urbanism, which is a movement, a national movement, that tries to conserve the countryside and build in urban ways, in ways that both preserves urban centers and neighborhoods, and designs new urban centers and neighborhoods in ways that are compelling from a traditional architectural point of view. And if you don't know about the new urbanism, I'm not going to preach up here about it, but there's a lot of issues that are being discussed under the umbrella of the new urbanism that are absolutely essential, 100% essential to what you're interested in as neighbors and residents. So you can find this information under CNU, Congress New Urbanism, cnu.org. There's a tremendous amount of information about placemaking, about the choice of appropriate mechanisms for dealing with all kinds of problems, from the ones we're discussing today in housing and architectural form to infrastructure and others. So these are some of the key principles of the new urbanism, and note how many of those you're actually having already established in South Pasadena, in the center of South Pasadena, in the project area we're working on. Connectivity. It is terribly important that architecture and urbanism happen on an interconnected set of streets, that allows a multimodal elaboration of this public space, and also allows multiple points of access, so you avoid congestion to the maximum degree. Space forming is an architecture and urbanism where individual buildings are not only about themselves, but when they're put in space, they also render beautiful streets, beautiful public spaces, squares, parks, etc. Compactness is what we discussed last night. Within a walkable shed of about a quarter-mile of radius, you have live, work, entertain, civic connection. You have all the important aspects of life. You at least have the option of reaching them on foot. Diversity is also very important, because within these bubbles, there's all kinds of ingredients of daily life. Frugality is a particularly important American characteristic, which is that you always invest in projects, publicly and privately, with the expectations that you get something back. You just don't throw money away the way you throw away money doing freeways. Freeways are single-purpose objects of a kind that create more damage than benefit. You want to invest in a way that does not block the next person from doing the right thing. Actually, you invest because you want to enable them to do the right thing, or you build better streetscape, you build better parking, you do all the kinds of things with the expectation that something important comes out of it for your community. And finally, there has to be a process of countering private rights with a public agenda in the form of a code. Private rights are constitutional, public rights are assumed through the planning process, and I think putting those two things together is an important subject. And of course, most importantly for South Pasadena, the actual form of this kind of urbanism is already the language of your daily life and the language of the city in which you live. You have an infrastructure of complex streets, big ones, small ones, intimate ones, residential ones, commercial ones, all interconnected, regional ones, local ones, all of them interconnected. Within that, you have a really remarkable network of public space. Most of your public space is in streets, beautifully planted streets. But there's also parks of all kinds, and public space in front of buildings, on the side of buildings, and so on. And then finally, there is a very complex fabric of objects that make up this world, and it is really the combination of those things that that is the reason why you all live here and why you feel so passionate about living here, because you don't live passively in this town, you live actively, and you think that it is possible to not only enjoy what you have, but to actually to institutionalize in such a way so it grows and prospers on its own terms. And notice that when I say fabric, I mean small buildings, medium buildings, large buildings, various uses, and all of them in a harmonious set of arrangements that make this place distinct. When you find yourself in suburbia, somebody would take you out blindfolded to a suburban environment, you wouldn't know where you are. You wouldn't have the slightest idea because they're all the same. But if somebody blindfolded you and let you see in Santa Monica, in Beverly Hills, in downtown Los Angeles, in Pasadena, in South Pasadena, in Riverside, you would immediately know where you are. And you would immediately know where you are because the issues we've been talking about finally rendered in buildings and the relationships between buildings or other places we're talking about end up becoming the identity and the presence and the uniqueness of all the cities. And here's an example of how new and old can coexist. Guess which the new building is. You don't have to think about it very much because it doesn't matter. The buildings new and old are completely compatible, and they belong in a fabric that is real and evolving and supportive of the kinds of values and ways of life we live in. So, what is the core? What is the core of the idea of compatibility? What is it that we can do to actually pursue the notion that certain things belong here and certain things don't belong here? I think we call this in architectural parlance building typology or an architectural typology. And what does typology mean? What does type mean? Well, the idea of type is that if you can think of this in cellular terms, if you can imagine buildings being almost like cells of a human body, and there are various cells, and the cells repeat and connect, and they make all kinds of arrangements in our bodies, they do in the city. So many of these types are common and very, very prominent, and to be found everywhere, and others are very unique. So this actually is a complete range of typology. The buildings actually outlined, I'm sorry, these images are very tiny, and they're very hard to see, but on the left-hand side we have single-family houses. You can see the footprints, and you can see less well the volumes. It started with single-family houses with granite flats. There are bungalow courts, there are rose walks, there are row houses, there are work buildings, courtyard housing, there are stacked flats as you go forward. There are line buildings, and finally there is mid-rise and high-rise buildings of various kinds. And there are examples of this everywhere within our immediate region. The key to proper development when one deals with the code is that one has to, and what these yellow lines indicate, they indicate that within certain zones in cities, we can have certain densities that can allow certain kinds of buildings to happen, and other places where other kinds of buildings can happen, and third places where third range of buildings can happen, but we cannot mix all buildings everywhere. Now, the damage of putting a two-story building in downtown Pasadena is by far less painful and difficult to observe than putting a six-story building on Mission. So very often we develop this catalogs of what building types are available and necessary and desirable by looking at existing context and drawing from the context the needs and the images and the realities of how buildings really ought to be in the future and everything compatible. And this I've shown you in a very, very general way. A single-family house. This is a muse, which is the area behind single-family houses, the island with secondary buildings, granite flats. These are beautiful types from my region, we say quadruplex. We have, and these are very much South Pasadena types that you have here in great variety. Townhouses, courtyard housing, villa, perimeter block, towers, line block of garage, and this is a simple typological range where I think this discussion in more specific terms ought to begin today, which is that we're going to exclude the single-family house and the ground flat because we're already in a commercial district. And I think we're going to exclude perennial block buildings and mid and high-rise buildings because we're not in this kind of intensity. So we're in this middle territory, which is the territory that's been completely, extraordinarily excluded from American urbanism in the last couple of generations, called the missing middle. New urbanists call this the missing middle. And they call it the missing middle because most of what we built have been single-family houses in the suburbs and attached and stacked flats in cities, but in intensities that have generally tended to favor developers and development as opposed to enabling development, but preserving community character. So what do we have here under what types do we have under missing middle? We have what we call shared house types, duplex, triplex, quadruplex. We have townhouses, single and stacked, and we have courtyard housing, fragment, half and whole. I'm not showing you any images because I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, because I'm sure having lived in this town, you probably have seen every one of those and you know what they are. The difficulty is how do we make them again, and how do we make them again in the light of both the practice of the private sector and regulation. Of course, we cannot affect the private practice. People practice the way they want, but we can affect regulation. By regulation, I mean we can actually demand that in certain places within the cities we're building, that the rules in place favor and enable this middle. And I want to show you some of the examples of how this goes over the last few years. We're going to design and build a number of those. So you will see how important this is as a scale of development to what needs to happen on this project. There are a number of different types of courts, from bungalow courts, about 12 dwellings per acre, attached courts, attached and stacked courts, 25, 35, 50, for hybrid courts, where part of the court is accessible by elevator, and then a double courts up to 60 dwellings per acre. Now, I'm sure many of you are totally accomplished planning commission and design commission warriors, and I certainly deeply appreciate that. And you fought a lot of these battles based on numbers, but numbers are extremely deceiving. Over the last 10 years, I've brought at least 30 different groups of people through Mission Meridian Village, and at the end of the meeting, the exiting words are always, I don't care about numbers, as long as you can give me this, I'm fine. Doesn't matter what numbers are. So that shows you then that density is a matter of form, a matter of understanding form, appreciating form, making sure the form is appropriate to where you're putting it, and not some kind of dire abstraction. The other thing that's extraordinary about courtyard housing is because it's not monolithic, and it's not designed around a core. Much of it is actually accessible without elevators. Is that, as you can see from this very simple outline of projects we've done around this recently, one can actually use this type of building independent of context. The context can be large, it can be small, it can be thin, it can be fat, it can be unusual in shape, and it's always possible to break a project down to small enough pieces, almost house-scale pieces, that allow you to get the job done of connecting the neighbors. The other thing it allows you a great variety in unit types. As you know from trying to find places to live or visiting people in your community, we also have not only a tremendous problem with most that has been built the last 50 years being single-family houses and flats, but almost everything is either flat internally as a unit type or a house. There's nothing in between. There are no lofts, there are no, in particular, there's no combination of those things within buildings. So this is a 12 EU per acre bungalow court. The bungalow court is a very potent type because this was one that we did for Pasadena Heritage almost 35 years ago, and we moved the buildings from the central city of Pasadena into an exurban site and surrounded in a larger site and put gardens and garages on the edges. this is an affordable housing project. It's still so within the city. And what is remarkable about it, I think this was probably done with our hands, it's not very clear, but these things were put on trucks and moved out and around and relocated here. But this actually is the key picture. And the key picture is that a building that's about 12 DUs per acre is actually fully compatible with the building next to it that's 5 DUs per acre. So you can begin to see here the argument that it doesn't matter what the density numbers are when buildings come side to side, it's their form really that matters extraordinarily. This is 3 times dense on the left as this on the right, and yet you have single-family houses facing the street. At Meridian Court behind our office, this was the first complete court built in Southern California since the 1930s. So it was almost 60 years between the last court in Los Angeles and this building. And this is classic courtyard housing. No elevators. All walk-ups. Some I think these are all 2-story units. It's in the corner of Meridian and the corner of California and Marengo. All courtyard units are accessible from the inside, garage underneath, and the units to the left also have a big workroom inside. This was the simplest thing. My partner Liz Mo and I had practiced for 20 years, and we had talked to many people about reviving this middle density and type. And in the end, we had to build this building for ourselves. Actually, we developed this building ourselves in order to make sure that people understood that it was possible, viable, and desirable, and it had the market. I wish I had kept the building because it has doubled in price value in the last 10 years. And then came this most extraordinary vision to build a real first-class court in West Hollywood, in the historic district of West Hollywood, south of Sunset. And this building has underground parking. It's almost up to 35 DUs per acre, and it's made up of smaller residential pieces. The scale, as you can see, is very compatible to the things around, which are about 3 and 4 stories. Entrance from the lower level. All the units that are facing forward are accessible from the street. All the circulation into this building is actually outdoors because of the extraordinary climate of our region. This is looking back into the front entrance. And then the courtyards are really quite marvelous with fireplaces for gathering and with lived work rooms, one for every unit. It is really an exceptional project, and the financial value brought to this kind of architecture is beyond belief, only because these buildings are so rare. It's like everything else. A rare car is very expensive. A rare building is also very, very expensive. One of the things we're trying to do is to normalize these prices. If a court had not been built in 50 or 60 years, if we had 5,000 courts, it wouldn't be very expensive. But when you have one, it is really invaluable in that kind of setting. And then Granada Court in Pasadena behind Romans. That's also a rather amazing building that here for the first time.
This is the one that was just constructed?
Yes, this was about, actually all of these are about 10 years old, approximately.
There's one that was just finished last year.
No, this is not, this is already 10 years old. No, actually, the one you think about is Granada, which is the building which is next to it to the left. This is the corner of Union and I don't remember, see this. What is the one? No, El Molino is to the west and to the east is Oak Knoll. It's Oak Knoll. I'm sorry. Yes, it's Oak Knoll. Thank you. So I think this is a very interesting thing because you heard us say yesterday that it is possible to imagine that Mission is a 2- and 3-story street and maybe Fair Oaks is a 3- and 4-story, 2-, 3- and 4-story street if one chose to make it that way because it's wider. And certainly larger buildings could happen. And this is precisely what happened here as well. This is a ground floor plan, which I'm showing you this form, only to go forward and illustrate to you that on the upper levels, the dark portions are the 3-story portions, the light portions are the 2-story portions, and the piece facing the Union, which is actually essentially boulevard at this point, is actually is actually a 4-story piece. So the massing of this building is something like that, with some very big 2 courtyards, direct openings from the streets into the courtyards, and a project that has this kind of configuration. It is really a piece of a neighborhood and not a piece of the district, and it makes a tremendous difference this way, but it's an enormously popular place, an extraordinarily popular place, both for its vision of its livability inside around the courtyards, but also for the way in which it sits in that corner and defines the density of a center city of the kind that the city has become. These are the courtyards inside the building. And then this is the next project, which is unbuilt, illustrates best, I think, the possibilities of thinking of architectural form as being more diverse than you typically see in architectural projects. This was a competition that we lost. Sometimes competitions that lose are the ones that have the most important ideas in them, because we ended up using these ideas very, very productively. It's in Ventura. It was on a piece of land that was owned by the school board in Ventura, as the one next door was. As you can see, there are 3 different blocks, and each block seems to have on it 3 different kinds of buildings. And what are they? Both the streets that are horizontal on this slide are very large boulevards, and the vertical ones are more modest streets. So you have double-loaded buildings, the thick ones, on the boulevards that are 4 stories. All the thinner buildings on the edge of streets are 3 stories, and the buildings inside the courtyards are 1 and 2 stories. So in a very simple way, you can see the massing, how that is developed. And when you see the perspective, you see the boulevard buildings up to 3 and 4, the side buildings at 2 and 3, and then the buildings at the cross points at 1 and 2. So within a block structure, then, you get this tremendous variety between different streets, street frontages, and the centers of blocks and the alleys. And this is actually, I think, where the most important idea of this entire presentation is born. The idea that when you build buildings, you don't actually are building buildings. What you're building is you're completing blocks that buildings actually have to relate to each other on a block structure. And that means what is to your right, what is to your left, what's in front of you, what's behind you. And this is where the idea of a rather revolutionary idea of blended density comes in. Is it possible on large sites to be building buildings, or on larger sites, to be building buildings that actually are not all repeated in the same density, but are in different internal densities and types in such a way so that they tend to reinforce the character of the streets they front on. And this, of course, is a very fundamental American problem, because we made a disastrous transition in this country from traditional architecture and urbanism to modernist architecture and urbanism in the 20s and 30s. This is Williamsburg houses in New York. You can see the variety of the neighborhood around it. It's certainly definitely grittier than South Pasadena, but you can recognize a traditional American town, an eastern town. We have 5 blocks removed, and buildings being built, all of them in the same density. And this is actually how the FAR mechanism started, and this kind of process is the one that destroyed every other American city, including almost this one, certainly Pasadena. And what we're trying to discover in our work is how to actually arrive at this kind of variety, which might be South Pasadena, might be Pasadena, it doesn't matter, but it is really an urban fabric that is familiar, is complex, is rich, and is really the essential place that you all like, appreciate, and want to live in. So we arrived at Mission Meridian Village in this track, in this discussion. I don't have to say very much about it. You know it upside down, inside out. I will not even describe it. You know the statistics. The only thing moving at the time we arrived here 12 or 15 years ago was Buster's. It was the only alive business. Everything else was shuttered. The neighbors across the street hated it, and it took 25 community meetings to get this project done. I think there were at least two different families who were unsatisfied. And this was after what I've told you today, this was the essential argument. If somebody came 12 years ago and built this building, it'll be state of the art. It'll be state of the art because what you have here is you have 67 units, and you have, which is an allowable density, and you have a given site, and state of the art means that you take that density and you build at the same density everywhere. The same buildings, the same open spaces, the same units. It's a uniform structure of housing. This is and continues to be the state of the art of modernist housing design. What we did, which is really truly extraordinary as an invention, as a point of inflection and change away from the dominant way of thinking about architecture, the architecture of housing, is we said the southern part of the site and the northern part of the site are very different. The southern part of the site is really part of a dying commercial district that needs to be rejuvenated. The trains do not come, by the way, they're aware. There is neighbors to the back that are robust and could take density in their backs, back to back. The people across the street are extremely sensitive, but we could drop the density and the form of the buildings in such a way as to make compatible architecture for them. And the neighbors to the north don't want to see anything here except single-family houses. So what the heck? Let's give them single-family houses. And what in fact happened, as you can see from the simple diagram, is that instead of getting the Williamsburg problem of airdropping buildings at single density, the individual definition of buildings, their character, and eventually their styles as they relate to existing buildings, end up creating streets. With the entire misunderstanding of cutting a number of trees down because the city suggested that all of the trees could be removed, and as the first one were removed, there was a revolution, and the process stopped. With the exception of that, this is really one of the most extraordinarily sane projects that we've seen in the last 60 years in terms of how one builds within density, within communities. By the way, all of this done. I mean, this is the frozen ice cube drawing that we do in our office. All of this is completely 100% to code relative to the mission plan, the mission district plan. We didn't ask for a single variance from it. And this, I think, is really the key idea. This is true almost everywhere, but only this one section speaks about it. This is a two-story house on the east, and the building to the west. With the third story of the houses is within the attic, and the porches of the houses are at the scale of either whole houses or porches of houses on the other side. So one builds compatibly by repeating many of the architectural elements, particularly frontages, street to street, and generates a streetscape. What is particularly important about this project is not what it is in itself, but how, in fact, it relates to the world around it and completes the street. There's a very nice network of public space, and of course, on top of everything we've talked about in terms of typology, you can also imagine that the uses within types can also vary, right? I mean, that you can have this building without any retail, or you can have this building with retail, and you can have this building with retail everywhere, up and down, all the way up the street, to the north. You can have any other of the types of the retail. We have buildings in the Mission District, which are houses, which are retail. So we should not be confusing the use of buildings with the form of buildings. The form of buildings is general. The use of buildings is specific and changeable over time. The form of buildings is immutable. And that, I think, is a really important lesson in getting away from conventional zoning. And of course, this piece of land was sold for a song because the owner that owned this piece of land did not believe that the trains would ever come or that the trains mattered. And of course, what we found out is that not only did the trains come, this building closed a very key gap in a gash in this district, and little by little, business started coming, people started getting attracted to this place. And in the 100-year war between Mission And Fair Oaks, mission wins round 5, I guess. They would say in a boxing match. And this is actually a wonderful illustration of what happens when you have a kind of high-skirted 3-story building, which is full all the way up to 3 stories, or you have a 2-story building with a third story buried in its attic. I will never forget this. It's really a beautiful thing that you can also experience next time you go to the library. These meetings were not very friendly, some of them. Some people were very unhappy about building here. And a woman got up in the midst of one of these meetings and said, so how do you plan to put a 3-story building in a 2-story neighborhood? How can that ever happen? Have you ever seen that? Has anybody ever seen this happen? And I was standing in the library, in the beautiful meeting room with a big window, a glass window, and I was saying to myself, oh my God, it's starting to pour. It's really coming. I can see it's coming. And I look out the window, and there's a beautiful bungalow out there that is 2 stories with a 3rd story in the attic. And I said, well, ma'am, if you actually turn that way, that's how we're going to do it. And that's where that comes from. It comes from right there. And of course, the streetscape, all of that is very important. The parking underground, I think one of the things we're going to talk about in the next couple of evenings is what are the key ingredients of these types? Where is the parking? How much do we step back from the street, when and why? How do we make neighbors on our sides? What kind of space do we have in the middle of the project for the use and benefit of the residents? What are the profiles of the building? Do we go full 3 or do we go 2 and step back? How do these things work? I think we need to discuss this, and you can see some version of this here. And of course, the question of style is paramount as well, because after we work out the proportions and the rhythms and the scales of buildings and the relationships to the neighbors, then we have to answer the question: what material, what color, are these reflective? Are they recessive? Are they multicolor? Are they one architectural expression or many? I mean, for us this was an experiment, but the fact was when you have a building that's 500 feet long, one of the ways to make sure that it's not a project is to actually break it up in such a way so that it looks like the buildings are separate, there are different colors, there are different details, and in many cases like this, actually they're a really seriously different set of finishes and materials. And public space and the issue of community is paramount. When we finished, the developer wanted to fence this courtyard. But there are so many eyes on this courtyard that there is no need to actually defend them in any way. Now, if this was closer to a retail district where people might come in while they were going around the retail business, it might be desirable to close them off. And there's a whole, one of the things we discovered also in the last generation is that public space is actually a subject of its own. I'm very fond of telling people that when, preceding the 1992 Olympics, the mayor of Barcelona, Maragall, held a competition with about 25 architects and proposed to renovate the great boulevards and the great parks of Barcelona, it was the first time in 60 years that public space had ever been elevated to the point of being a project, an architectural project worth investing in and building in order to change the city. So we've learned a lot since then. Only 25 years have passed since then, but this idea has taken tremendous hold. A lot of money and a lot of energy is being put into creating public space, the space between buildings. And in fact, there's a whole dynamic about how to make space better or worse, how to make it private, semi-private, or fully public. And I think that's an important thing as you move forward, judging projects, the development to continue to think about it.
Before you go on, I know you said that you requested no variance in the construction of Mission Meridian Village, but I also know that the Mission Street specific plan does provide for density bonuses.
We use the density bonus.
You did qualify.
Yeah, and I think that is actually a remarkable idea. I think who did the specific plan? Do you remember, Kaiser?
No.
I don't remember.
So it's Pat Smith.
Pat Smith, right? Pat Smith, thank you. Pat Smith did the specific plan, and I think this specific plan has tremendous merit. And the reason it has tremendous merit is you can see that half a dozen buildings have been built, that they're actually worthy of this district. I mean, there are all kinds of issues everywhere because we live in a very unruly time, architecturally speaking, but they're really very fine buildings of their kind. And one of the greatest aspects of this plan is really the mechanism to gain density for it's a very clever idea. Keep the density very low, allow the density to be up to 3 stories, say, and allow for underground parking. Second level underground parking for public use. And I think this is something we should really be thinking very much continuing in the future, because it might mean that we don't have to build public use garages. That the second levels of 4 or 5 buildings, certainly in the Mission area, I don't know about the Fair Oaks area, but in the Mission part of this downtown, all you need is 2 or 3 more projects that provide 40, 50, 60 more spaces underneath the building, each one, and at that point you're pretty much covered for parking.
But you know, there was a problem with that on the project behind Mike and Ann's. They got a density bonus and they were supposed to have 10 public parking spaces, and that whole thing was a big mess, and I don't know if it's ever been resolved. And I don't know if the public even uses that, so I think it had to be.
Well, I think one of the really important things to think about, and that's for Kaiser and our team, is whether there has to be a threshold for the numbers of parking spaces that you can turn to. I mean, if you're providing 4 or 5 or 10 spaces for the public, that's an insignificant number, and it's very difficult to market, it's very difficult to access it. I mean, there probably has to be a threshold. I don't know what the number is, 30, 40, 50, I don't know what the number would be, something to discuss. And I just wanted very briefly to illustrate to you how this beautiful idea of hybrid density is applicable to even denser projects. Mission Meridian is an average 42 dwellings per acre. Del Mar is 100 dwellings per acre. You know the site. And this is how the project was rendered to us through the specific plan process. Crew cut 7 stories, just one big building. And I think the way we transformed it was by putting a tower in the corner as a marker, but taking the 7-story piece and putting it in the interior of the block of the boulevard and wrapping the interior of the whole thing with smaller scale buildings. It became something like that. And again, in the interest of identifying the difference between Del Mar, Arroyo, and Raymond, because Raymond is in a park, the historic station on it has a lot of public space around it. There's a paseo cutting east to west, and the buildings on Arroyo are 3 and 4 stories, while the buildings Del Mar are 7 stories. So the fact is that you can read, and I think the towers would be 8 or 9, you can identify in an urban center of this kind, with 100 use per acre average, a range from 140 or 150 use per acre, which are really the corner buildings and the big buildings, down almost to 40. So you mix them and blend them, and you get 100 average, and you have a building of some serious significant form. A very beautiful public space at the bottom of it continues. You know this project well. Not enough retail, I don't think, but still some retail in the courtyard, and then the project of the core. I mean, it's a city project, it's not a town project, it's not a South Pasadena project, but it's important to see how this is configured to make this place special, and you can only imagine what it would be like if it was done. Well, I mean, or you could look across the street and see what it would be like if it had been done by different people. So our idea was particularly as a building bridges the trains, that this becomes, as you come out the freeway and you enter Pasadena, it is not possible to imagine that all these industrial buildings and the smaller buildings will ever change very much, but once you hit Del Mar, you're almost downtown, at which point it becomes a marker for entering downtown. That's the tower, and that's the bridge. And of course, always public space, and public space in use in around. This is 347. 347. Mission Meridian is 67. And the most disastrous part of this project was that everywhere in California, where trains go less than 80 miles an hour, they go less than 80 miles here, the State Transportation Commission allowed the trains to go for public space. So we didn't have to separate them. For some very bizarre reason in Los Angeles County, they made us put these walls around the trains. The result is that there's a division between the plaza and the train right away is supposed to the whole thing be completely open, which is, I think, is a calamity. And I'm going to finish with a couple of other projects which are peripheral, but they are of great interest to you. I think the first one is the taking away of the 710 gash. We'll call this a triumph project. After South Pasadena wins after the 60 years, the big change is going to happen someplace else on the building side, but it's worth noting because it's a beautiful change. And I think it's important, the reason I'm showing to you is not only because of your great, extraordinary fight, our great fight, which we've been admiring over the years, we've been part of, but also because it is part of the process I just described. It uses the method I just described and the method we're hoping to use in infilling here downtown. So these are two charrettes, very brief charrettes. The first charrette takes two alternatives. Alternative on the left is we keep the ditch. Alternative number two is we fill the ditch. We destroy the bridges and we rebuild the whole thing on the surface. We completely restore the city. The difference is about $15 million, which turns out to be a drop in the ocean because there's 55 net acres here and about 8 million, 10 million an acre. That's $500 million in real estate value. You heard well, $500 million in real estate value is what the city of Pasadena could gain from this if the state said, here, take your ditch back. So the community chooses the filling of the ditch and the complete restoration of the city, not surprisingly. It's a restoration of roads and blocks. And then in the second charrette, and this actually is very much of an important thing for what we're trying to do here over these days, we give community members 3 aerial photographs of Google Earth. I know you have complex lives and you don't have time to play with Google Earth. But Google Earth is the ultimate urbanist tool. I mean, you can go on vacation to the Caribbean this evening just by going around Google Earth. I mean, it's completely, absolutely stunning, an instrument. But you can do great, great, great serious work on urbanism, looking at cities and trying to understand what they are, how and how they compare to where you are. And this is neighborhood, mid-density, and downtown high-density in Pasadena. So we gave this densities to about 120 people and about 10 tables, and put a color for each density, and this is the summary of the colors for this 3-hour, 4-hour charrette. Not surprisingly, as you go towards the 210, higher density, in the middle between the large and green, middle density, and as you come to the Olympics and in the direction of South Pasadena, low density. So, and this actually is also a very important thing for those who think that you might want to continue to advocate for better architecture and urbanism. A picture is worth 3,000 words, and or maybe 3 million words, who knows, depending on the state. So we were able to take this argument that is made to you regarding building types and show in the spectrum of types where these occur in Pasadena. So people were familiar with what they were, so that they understood what they were doing from single houses to denser types. And then we produced these 2 drawings. This is Google again, a view of the mountains and the gash, and we infilled it with buildings of different densities. And even more, I think you can read where you are, right? I mean, this is the ambassador to the left, and you can see where you are. I mean, we're floating over California, essentially. And you can see downtown Parsons in the middle left. And then this is even more dramatic, more radical. And it's more radical because it really completely normalizes the access to the freeway. It doesn't destroy the exiting of the freeway at that point. All the connections in and out of the freeway are maintained, but the form of the city is changed drastically. Parsons is the foreground here. There's a 180-foot wide boulevard with 2 lanes on either side and a 90-foot median that is really a beautiful linear park on the east side. So you can see how a very simple urbanist exercise of this kind, or the one we're working on here, can actually provide imagery that both elevates the discussion and can actually get people to agree that certain forms of development might be preferable to others. Here, low density meant 2 or 3, the yellow meant 2 or 3 stories, the middle meant 3 to 5 stories, mostly 3 to 4 stories, and the high meant 5 to 7 or 8, which is actually totally acceptable density on the upper third close to the office parts of South Pasadena.
Is this
ratio that you use, or something, you know?
This is the residence jurisdiction. We just organize the forms in this way, but the actual densities were determined by 120 people participating. And what is astounding about this also is that not only will the city stand to get $500 million and get the mess away from this and interference with their neighborhoods and your neighborhoods, and of course put into place an alternative transportation system north-south that goes to South Pasadena and beyond. But also the other astounding thing here is that you can get, the city can get conservatively a $25 million 30-year boost in taxes at the end of the 20th year, there'll be about 25 million in taxes raised from a project like that. And it might be possible there might be another 20 to 25 from the development of projects and buildings around this place, which are currently, as you know, particularly this side of the freeway, are just completely underdeveloped because of the mess of speeding traffic and bad air and so on. So finally, this is my last project, and then we're going to have some questions. Finally, the question of public space. Public space is essential, and public space is essential in the way in which it relates to the way people gather and to the way they understand themselves as citizens in cities. And certain places can do it more adequately than others. This is in Lancaster, in the northern suburbs of Los Angeles, a very lowly municipality with very few significant building traditions. And there's a 6-lane road going through this town. Its main street is completely devastating, as you can see. Now, I know for a fact we cannot reduce either Meridian or Fair Oaks, and I'm not making this argument in terms of those streets, but I just want to tell you, in principle, I want to show you that it's very important to think about how to transform streets and to make public space within the boundaries that are established by the engineering behavior of streets. So we looked for precedents about how to do this, and we didn't have to go far. We looked at around us in Barcelona and many others, working again with the communities in the participatory process. And we chose around us as an example to use. And here's, okay, so we don't have a 6-story buildings, so we have distinguished buildings, but we have 2-story and 1-story buildings. But we're able to actually organize perfectly the space between them by taking away 2 lanes. So there's parking on one side and 1 lane going east, and parking on the other side and 1 lane going west, and a median in the middle. This median allows for parking during the day, and on special events it's vacated and used as a rambla. So it's not a permanent rambla, but it's a flex rambla. So you can see how cars behave. This space is lit the way it is shown. It is landscaped the way it is shown. And it's also programmed, this is its full blossoming, and it's programmed to operate, for instance, in this case, as a block street as a street market. You can see the providers parking their trucks, little tents, and people walking in the middle of the Rambla. And this is the Charrette, where you get two-way traffic on one side and parade on the other side. There were at least half a dozen such events that were able to program. And this is transformation, in computer terms. First, the staking of the middle, the lighting, the planting, and the coming of bigger buildings, cars, and a street market. So it's a remarkable transformation in very few pieces.
Is that done already?
Yeah, it is actually built. And it's built, not only is it built, it's actually really worth a visit. It's worth a visit on Saturday. It's not very far away. And it's worth seeing what the community has done to improve itself. It won 2 years ago a national EPA award for redevelopment because of the financial consequences of this. What happened here was that the number of units, the number of businesses that were started, the amount of construction money, the tax benefits to the city were overwhelming in the 3-year period following the construction.
What street is that?
That's Lancaster Boulevard. And I'll finish with this image because in the end, the reason somebody asked the question yesterday, is working for us or are you working for developers? I tried to explain that yesterday, but in the end, the most important reason for doing this, working with you and for you, is because the place in which you live, both the buildings and the space, is your identity. Is your personal identity, your family identity, and your community identity. And the most stunning thing that happened, I was not expecting this one, the most stunning thing that happened in Lancaster was that the first Christmas after this project was finished, they had the first Christmas celebration in Lancaster ever, which is completely extraordinary to imagine that there were, I don't know, 100 years ago there might have been 2,000 people there, and 50 years ago there might have been 30,000 people there, and 10 years ago there were 80,000 people there, but there was nowhere to go that they could associate with and empathize with as being a place worth celebrating anything. And the first year this was done, this would happen. And the city manager sent me this picture, and we almost came to tears, you know, so incredible to see. Now, happily, you do have a center, you love a center, it is here, it's almost done, and I think that the task in front of us is actually to finish it on its own terms. Thank you, and let's have some questions. Sir.
Might have just on the future meeting, or you can have one specifically on zoning in South Pasadena.
The question is, in one of our meetings, are we going to be talking specifically about zoning?
Yes,
Form-based
we will
code.
be on posting. Posting and the open house.
Okay, then I won't ask you more.
Well, and in the evenings, I think we might be, Friday, we'll probably be saying a few things about zoning as well, what we're projecting.
Thursday,
But if you have some thoughts or ideas, please share them.
Thursday day or
Happy to
Thursday
respond.
night?
Thursday day, afternoon, and then Friday night.
Friday night, yes.
Sure.
What do you see as the implication of the rise of autonomous vehicles and the possible decline in private car ownership for new urbanism, specifically for our mission district?
It's not very clear to me there's going to be any significant change. I mean, I think we have to wait and see. In the last 6 months, there's been a notable drop in optimism and in boosterism about autonomous vehicles. I don't know if you noticed, but last year this time there were 3 articles a day, and all of a sudden you can barely find the subject anywhere, and I'm wondering what that means. But nonetheless, I think that generally there might be less of a need for parking. I think it might affect parking in principle, I think, rather than traffic. Because these cars are going to continue to circulate, and I don't see many of us necessarily getting out of our cars. Some would for sure, but not others. So the question is how many vehicles moving constantly against how many people getting out of their cars. I think certainly Uber has played an extraordinary role. I'm very surprised that the MTA is not publicizing numbers or advertising the fact that people should be coming to the station by Uber and not by car.
You mentioned as one of our advantages that we have a center or a place to gather, but do we? Where do you think we gather in South Pasadena? Well,
I mean, I think that in this tug of war between Fair Oaks and Mission has won the 5th round because of the trains and the little park where your market is every week. I think that space is an amazing community magnet. I mean, it's a rare, extraordinary magnet.
I agree that Thursday farmers market
Yeah.
creates a very special moment. Are there ways to enhance that feeling or that gathering space beyond what exists today?
Well, I think one of the important things that we should be talking about tonight, and I'm looking at Mark and also at Kaiser, is that I think one of the things we need to distinguish is the character of Fair Oaks as opposed to the character of Mission. I think with the volumes of cars moving up and down Fair Oaks, it is very, very difficult imagining and have very much intimate public space there. I mean, it's possible, I guess, in certain places, but it's difficult. And it seems to be absolutely natural Mission, where every other project, I think, would be a project in which some gesture should be made towards providing space, either a courtyard or a serious setback. I mean, Mike and Ann's is a remarkable project, I think, in many ways. A truly remarkable project. It's not designed as a plaza. It could have been designed much better as much more of a community plaza. It's very private space, but nonetheless it's just extraordinary. So to the degree I think that each project built on the street, or the remaining, how many are there? 7, 8, 10, how many projects on Mission remaining? 10? Or so, something like that. If every one of them gave something back in terms of public space, that would be really very, very special. And maybe that's one of the differences. Maybe bigger buildings and slightly less humorous more serious on Fair Oaks and more open and inviting and smaller on Mission.
I wanted to say, when I started on the Cultural Heritage Commission back in the 80s, the Chamber of Commerce president at that time, nothing for now, believe me, said that the best thing that we could get out of the historic business district on Mission was the bricks. And was the bricks. And it has been a tough fight and a long fight, and I think we're all very much enjoying what's happening, you know, with your transit or the development and the train and all the rest of this stuff. And it just took a long time to say, no. What we've got is something to build on. So
There are people actually, there are some people in the United States who are building remarkable downtowns from scratch.
yeah.
There is one such place in Easton, called Easton in Columbus, Ohio. And the developer there is a person of unusual vision who is fond of saying that there are two kinds of retail experiences. There are need experiences, and there's wish experiences. And I think the difference between the kind of retail that was imposed on us on strips and otherwise was need experience retail. And I think what traditional downtowns represent are wish experience. And wish experience means that you really want to do something because the place encourages you to do it. And it's mostly experience and entertainment based, and it has to do with the lightness of being away from your house or associating with your friends or meeting people randomly and so on. How else would you assess the astronomical success of Buster's, for instance? I mean, it's a little hole in the wall that sells insignificant pastries, and yet it's a community institution, right? It's a community institution. How can you describe that as the success story that it is? When it's $3 at a time.
We also learned through preservation conferences that more people visit historic downtowns than they do national parks.
Well, because they're sick of sameness. I mean, that's what happens.
Oh yeah, Alexandria, Virginia, all of these. Old Town Pasadena as a model for the revival of the downtown.
And we don't actually know exactly what's going to happen. What's going to happen, 100 years from now, when there's even less historic fabric, and then you possess some of this. It's like owning a Ferrari. You have some of the last remaining brick buildings in the world.
Just a couple of things. One, in terms of built downtowns, I don't know how you feel about the downtown Brea. Have you seen downtown Brea?
Yes, I have.
And
How do I feel about downtown Brea? I think very well about downtown Brea. I think architecturally it is very, very difficult when you're living in a suburban community like that to enforce high standards, particularly if there is nothing at all there, as there wasn't there. So it's very, very difficult to build buildings of high quality. Hopefully here we're going to build buildings of very high quality also that, because there's really new buildings here that are so.
So I was specifically going to ask you a question now. I really enjoyed your presentation. I have to say, I just thought it was absolutely terrific and very inspirational. I did notice, and something I've noticed in the last decade, is that every decade seems to have its own point of view about style and different things. But many of the very beautiful buildings that you were showing hark back to styles of different decades, so the 1930s Spanish style and 1910s Craftsman style. Is there room, do you think, in a place like South Pasadena, having respect for the scale, for the uses, for the density, for the materials even, to have a monument, a style that is recognizably of 2010 and not of 1910? Do you think there's room for
There is indeed. I think I think there are some very fundamental issues with modernism that stand in its way to being an appropriate style for neighborhoods and districts of a traditional kind. One of them is that as a style, it is so bound. It's new, first of all, relatively, so it does not have enough of a deep experience of examples to know how to adapt itself as a language and make places of a certain kind, where traditional styles, vernacular styles do. I mean, it's so much easier really to make a beautiful building in a bungalow style than to do it in a Stockholm glass style. The other one is that, for me, the problem with modernism is that its triumph is transparency, and its shortfall is transparency. Because anytime you build a building in this climate and you take a facade facing south and you turn into glass, you're done. Either you're done or you are a poster child for petroleum dependence. And I think if buildings come, which are more contemporary style, I think they really need to be much more wall-oriented than void-oriented in their style. They need to be by far more solid, in other words, than transparent. And I think there should be plenty of space for it. I mean, variety is important. We in our own work, we're interested in traditional architecture because we think that the ravages of modernism is so extreme on our communities that at least we have dedicated ourselves to trying to repair, if you wish, to ease things, to change things in order to make them more normal, as opposed to chasing the next bus and the next bus and the next bus, and not necessarily caring about the nature of places the way they have been. I mean, urban America has been eroded very drastically about architecture. Its campuses, its districts, its neighborhoods, but drastically, dramatically. So I think, yes, it can be done, but we're not going to be the ones that do it, I don't think. Not us. Yeah.
In the Lancaster, was there an integration of maybe public art? Is that?
Yes, it is.
Is that one that
Yes, that's public art. Yeah,
so it was.
Actually, one of the first things that was built after this was done was an art museum. It was an art museum, small local art museum in Lancaster, which is actually an interesting thing about this part of your city that we're in. Although there's public buildings and civic buildings everywhere in the city, there's a relative dearth of it in here. So, I mean, one of the interesting questions is whether there's the possibility of introducing a public building in this area somewhere, a civic building. That means being taxed, of course, and all kinds of other interesting things.
You want a common building or request for societies to change their architecture as time goes. It's certainly not new. I was in Scotland 3 years ago. One of the things that I found most illuminating is that they'd have a castle, and then there'd be models of what that castle looked like in the first iteration, the second iteration, the third iteration. And I had this mental image that a castle is a castle and that's it. But no, it's just like our house. We've done many modernizations of adding this and taking away that. This is nothing new.
Yeah, right. Well, secondary interior standards in the United States allow you to modify buildings and to work around them.
But a request I do have, which is dependent upon your desire to do this, I would love to take a walk with you around the mission and for you to say that this building, it has these good points and here's where it failed and this is working with this other building and it's not working with them. I would be fascinated by that.
Well, come tomorrow night at 6 and we can take a half-an-hour walk. Anybody who wants to come?
Be there. I'm there.
Okay. We'll meet here at 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
Very good.
I think 1414 Fair Oaks, which is a collaborative community Smith-Williams complex,
Yes.
which really addressed the issue about creative space and, a large space that could be broken down and changed over time. But that's a more modern structure.
It is. It's a beautiful one.
I think it's this 1960s.
And it speaks to the question of being shaded and
Right.
organized around courtyards and the landscape matters. I was reflecting very much more to say commercial buildings that are all glass. I mean, you go down Wilshire and Beverly Hills, and next to the Beverly Wilshire there is a glass office building. Those kinds of buildings.
No, I-
It could be torn down.
Any other questions? One more down there. Yeah, okay, one more.
Quick question, are there any cities that we can look to for best practices who have incorporated the type of approach you're describing into their plan or into their building codes?
I think the closest one is Pasadena, and it's not perfect. I think there is your planning, your design commission and their design commission are very much in sync. I don't think they are in communication, but I think the values are very common. Anything else you can think
Ventura.
of? Ventura? Yeah, Ventura is another one.
In their current system, our current system here, is from the last general plan, has zoning code change and all commissions and so forth. Was at least intent to do that now, obviously, we can update.
Yeah. So you are ahead of the curve, obviously, in many ways. I mean, there are every greatly prospering municipality in Southern California. I'm thinking about Santa Monica and Culver City and so on. You have to look at them in a variety of ways. I mean, there are projects there that are of a certain kind, and there are controls in place that give results, and there are other things that happen there that is completely horrifying. So it's very difficult. It's very difficult to choose one place and think that it's the place to look at. But I think the new code here is going to be one of the few places in Southern California that's going to have such a form-based form of regulation. Okay, thank you again, and see you this evening. Okay, at 7. 7 o'clock, and then tomorrow at 6.
Thank you very much.